My parents always favored my twin sister, but the final straw was when they blew my entire wedding fund on her extravagant big day without even telling me. When my mom later came to me with a selfish demand, expecting me to just accept it and move on, I finally had enough. I cut them off completely, choosing peace over a lifetime of being treated like the afterthought. I'm a 23-year-old with a twin sister, Allison. We're not on good terms. Actually, we aren't even speaking, and that goes for my parents too. We did have some communication in the past, despite how I'd been treated, but for the past 2 years, I've kept my distance. They hadn't reached out until recently. Allison is 12 minutes my senior and, by default, the favored child. My parents initially planned for just one child, thinking they couldn't afford two. By the time they realized they were having twins, it was too late, and my mom didn't want any risks. I learned about this in high school from a tipsy uncle at a Thanksgiving gathering. That day was essentially when I stopped trying to gain my parents' approval. They had done what many might in their situation, had 2 children, then decided to love only one. That one was Allison, not me. From our earliest days, the sibling rivalry between Allison and me was intense. Anything she achieved, I tried to surpass, hoping to impress our parents. Instead, it seemed they disliked me more for outperforming their golden child. To be honest, Allison wasn't truly interested in being better than me. She just craved validation. So, she'd pretend to care about our competition. I'll admit, she was skilled at manipulation, making people believe she was genuinely hurt when I succeeded. This led many, including my parents, some relatives, and even high school acquaintances, to validate her feelings and put me down to make her feel better. Ultimately, my pursuit of being better than my sister resulted in good grades and numerous extracurricular achievements. Allison, on the other hand, gained attention, validation, and sympathy from my parents and others because I was consistently painted as the bad guy for making her feel inferior. Looking back, I wouldn't trade my accomplishments, though I certainly wish I had rubbed my successes in her face more back then. 2 years ago, we celebrated our 21st birthday. By then, we had both graduated. She had finished at a standard college, but I had graduated from one of the state's top business schools. Not only that, I was also the valedictorian and had a scholarship, which meant my parents saved a significant amount on my education. Call me naive, but I actually thought my parents would be pleased about this. They weren't. They only paid attention to Allison and her future, given she had barely scraped by. We both moved back home. While I was already working from home as an intern at a firm, Allison was still searching for jobs and getting rejected constantly. My parents focused more on her struggles and didn't even bother to congratulate me. I can't say I was surprised, but I was definitely disappointed. I tried to conceal it because I was still living with them and hadn't saved enough to move out. I decided to keep my feelings to myself, but after our 21st birthday, I just couldn't anymore. I expected them to do something special for us, but the day before our birthday, I found myself alone at home. All they left was a note saying they'd gone to the beach with Allison and her friends, planning to return in a few days. I still vividly recall how shattered I felt reading that note. They took Allison and her friends on a beach trip, and all I got was a happy birthday note and a $50 gift card. Many things about my childhood were unfair, but that was where I drew the line. It was so incredibly disheartening and heartless that I decided to move out that very day and never look back. I had a couple of friends who offered to let me stay with them until I found my own place and could afford it, which wouldn't take long since the firm where I was interning was likely going to hire me after the internship. I only needed a temporary place for 2 months at most. I packed my belongings and moved in with a friend without informing my parents or sister, and I haven't regretted it. They didn't miss me enough to ask me to return either. They did call me on my birthday, the day after I moved, but not to wish me well. They wanted to tell me they'd be back soon and suggested I call a plumber to fix a tap. I informed them I no longer lived at home and had moved out, thinking that information might elicit some reaction. No such luck. My parents seemed fine with it, and Allison didn't care. That was it. That was the last proper conversation I had with my family. Since then, I haven't gone back to see them, nor have I heard from them. I did occasionally hear about Allison through friends, which kept me updated on her life, but that's all. My friends knew nothing about my parents, and my parents knew nothing about me. I've worked hard over the past 2 years, and now I have my own place. It's not a mansion, but it's a pleasant apartment in a good neighborhood. The rent is manageable. With my income, which is great because most people my age haven't achieved this so quickly, I'm content with how my life has turned out, and I've tried my best to keep my family out of my thoughts. I know Allison got married a few months ago to a businessman nearly 10 years her senior and is now enjoying life in California. I thought all was settled with my family, but 2 days ago, my uncle called, urging me to visit my parents quickly because they'd been in a severe car crash and wanted to see me. I rushed to the hospital as soon as I could. Of course, I'm not heartless. Upon arrival, I learned they had been there for a couple of days, recovering from their injuries. A truck had hit their car. They survived, but sustained serious injuries. They didn't have health insurance because my dad always believed that if we just took care of ourselves, we wouldn't need a hospital at all, which is, by far, one of the most absurd opinions I've ever heard. They first contacted my sister, but she told them she wasn't coming back, nor would she help them financially. Apparently, it was tacky for our parents to ask for financial help from their wealthy son-in-law so soon after their wedding, and she didn't want to appear like a gold digger to her husband. She also didn't want to fly back because she couldn't simply abandon her home and her 2 kids, who weren't even her own. They were her husband's children from a previous marriage. But she was too busy playing happy family with her husband's relatives to visit her own parents in the hospital after a terrible car accident. It's not as if she could have helped them with the bills even if she wanted to, because if her husband wasn't there for her, she wouldn't have been able to afford even the flight tickets back home, seeing as she's just a stay-at-home mom now to children who aren't even her own. So much for being the favorite daughter and the golden child. I couldn't believe they hadn't even had the decency to call me first. But it became even more infuriating when my uncle said my parents now expected me to cover their medical expenses. It's obviously a huge sum, and it would take me a long time to recover from such a financial loss. I don't want to spend so much. My parents always favored my twin sister, but the final straw was when they blew my entire wedding fund on her extravagant big day without even telling me. When my mom later came to me with a selfish demand, expecting me to just accept it and move on, I finally had enough. I cut them off completely, choosing peace over a lifetime of being treated like the afterthought, especially on people who never cared for me or showed me any love my entire life. I know they have other family to support them, and even if I don't pay, someone else will. It's just that it would likely be more humiliating for them to accept money from others, and they definitely have to return it much sooner than they would have had to return money to me. At least, that's what they told me while asking me to cover the bills, even promising I'd get the money back quickly. So I'm in a difficult situation. I can either embarrass my parents by refusing to pay their medical bills and prioritize my own well-being, or I can pay for them, lose my own money, and then keep waiting for them to return that amount. To be completely honest, I'm not inclined to pay for them at all. We haven't spoken in the last 2 years, and things have been strained between me and my family for as long as I can remember. They're practically strangers to me now, so I don't feel much obligation to help them out right now. But then, that would mean I'm no better than Allison, which would sting. So, am I in the wrong for not wanting to help my parents pay their hospital bills after a severe car accident? Update 1. Hello, I decided not to help my parents. It was a really tough decision, but truthfully, I knew their bills would be taken care of, so they had nothing to worry about. They had only asked me because they didn't want to ask their other relatives. They were being too proud. I haven't told them yet, though. How do you even tell your family you're not going to help your parents cover their medical expenses after such a terrible accident? It's been almost 5 days since I saw them, and after reading the comments, I realized I was still subconsciously competing with Allison. She didn't help our parents, so I felt the need to step up and prove I was the better daughter or whatever. I guess I'll never shake that competitive streak, no matter how hard I try. It's just who I am now. Most comments agreed it was foolish of my parents not to have health insurance, and I concur. It was truly absurd for my father to discourage that, and had I been part of their lives, I would have ensured he got insurance. He didn't even have his car insured because he thought he was such a great driver. They're fortunate the accident was the truck driver's fault. Otherwise, the cost of car repairs would also be coming from their own pockets. Regarding their financial situation, which many of you inquired about, I'd say my parents are doing okay. They're not wealthy, nor are they poor. My dad is a sales head at his company, and my mother works in HR at a smaller firm. Their combined income is sufficient for them, And since they no longer have to support me or Allison, I'd say they have enough. Growing up, Allison and I didn't have to worry about money. But of course, we couldn't live lavishly either. We were in the middle, and they still are. But I can't understand why my parents wouldn't be able to pay for their bills themselves if they can borrow money and then promise to return it. Surely, they could just pay the bills themselves. They haven't told me the reason why, and I don't think I'll find out now either. Update 2: I informed my parents that I wouldn't be covering their expenses. They had been calling me for the past week, and yesterday I finally realized I couldn't just ignore them and let this continue until they were out of the hospital. So, I answered their calls and told them I had thought about it and didn't feel obligated to help them. As expected, they didn't take it well and were very angry. My mom completely ripped into me, yelling as loudly as she could with her broken ribs, calling me ungrateful and such, the usual. My dad simply told me I was no longer their daughter and hung up after my mom finished yelling. It didn't hurt as much as I thought it would, because I hadn't truly been their daughter for a very long time. I mean, I can't even recall the last time I felt loved by my parents, and they hadn't purposely spoken to me or checked up on me for 2 years, simply because I had moved out after they ignored me on an important birthday. So, I never really had parents anyway. I'm just going to live my life the way I have for the past 2 years, and probably even before that. This doesn't make a huge difference to me, as my parents had mistakenly thought it would. Unfortunately, my uncle did call me after the phone call with my parents to give me another lecture, but I hung up after the first few seconds because I didn't need that from others. They could think whatever they wanted about me. It simply didn't matter to me at this point. My uncle then texted me to inform me that they still had other family to arrange the money from. And since it had come to this, my parents had decided to use the money from the fund they had set aside for our weddings. They had already spent more than half of the wedding fund on Allison's wedding, and whatever little money they had left after that, they had spent on a Europe trip. That's why they barely had any savings left, and that's why they couldn't pay for themselves. So, that's one mystery solved. Of course, my uncle had told me everything to make me feel bad, but all it made me feel was relief that I hadn't spent my hard-earned money on my parents' bills. They had spent their own savings irresponsibly, and that wasn't my fault. Their lack of insurance due to their own delusional beliefs was also not my fault. Now, they could borrow money from their relatives or do whatever they pleased, but I wasn't giving them anything. They weren't entitled to anything of mine anymore, not my time, and definitely not my money. Update 3: Hey, so something genuinely odd occurred today, and I need to share it. I haven't been able to tell my friends about any of this because most people I know right now haven't known me long, and I don't think I want to reveal anything about my family history to these people just yet. So Reddit is all I have. Anyway, it's been almost 2 weeks since I last spoke to my parents. A couple of hours ago, in the evening, Allison showed up at my apartment. I was surprised by her sudden visit. First, because I didn't think she would know where I lived, but one of our old high school friends told her the neighborhood I resided in, and she inquired around to find me, which was a significant effort for her to undertake just to see me. She also looks and behaves very differently from what I remembered. She's become more refined and sophisticated, I think, and that's a huge change because she used to speak like she was still in high school, but now she sounds more ladylike somehow and even carries herself better. Her way of dressing has changed. The jewelry she wears has changed, and even her makeup. It actually felt like I wasn't even talking to Allison today. Everything about her has aged all of a sudden. But one thing that hasn't changed is her core personality. I guess you can't put makeup on your heart and tell people to call it Mrs. Davis, like she did with herself. Her personality and beliefs certainly haven't undergone any renovation. I let her in after she knocked at my door. I was genuinely surprised to see her, but I was also curious why she had come, so I decided to talk to her. After some brief conversation about her life, where she told me everything she'd been up to unprompted and boasted about how fabulous her life was as a stay-at-home mom of 2 toddlers married to a wealthy guy with nothing to worry about except her cuticles, I waited for her to get to the point, politely nodding at her tedious speech about how wonderfully underrated being a traditional housewife was. My parents always favored my twin sister, but the final straw was when they blew my entire wedding fund on her extravagant big day without even telling me. When my mom later came to me with a selfish demand, expecting me to just accept it and move on, I finally had enough. I cut them off completely, choosing peace over a lifetime of being treated like the afterthought. She was even advising me to do the same, so I truly couldn't wait for her to finish talking about irrelevant things and get to the damn point. She did, after about 15 minutes of detailing her life. She told me she had come back on her own because our parents had apparently been begging her to visit them after the accident. They didn't want her money, they just wanted her to be there for them. So, after 2 weeks, she had finally come back and figured she'd come to see me too, so we could bury the hatchet. So far, so good. But then she started complaining about how demanding our parents were and that they were disrespecting her new family. She went on and on about how she had to leave her 2 babies with their nanny just so she could visit them, and that she resented our parents for making her choose between them and her kids. I'll never understand why exactly she keeps referring to them as her kids when they're obviously not hers. She told me a lot about her marriage and her husband, even though I hadn't asked. From what I gathered, the guy she married had probably only married her to increase his chance of getting at least partial custody of his kids, which he did. But she seemed to believe he actually loved her or something. He had been in a custody battle for quite some time, and since he was a full-time businessman, he didn't have enough time for his kids. His ex-wife was using that against him, but then he announced his engagement and impending marriage as soon as the divorce was finalized, and that tilted the scales for him. Allison told me all of this while bragging about how she had saved those kids, but it just sounded to me like her husband had used her. They hadn't even known each other for more than a year when he asked her to marry him, so it was very clear he wasn't in love with her. Nobody falls in love that quickly, especially after a divorce. But she seemed blissfully unaware of it, or perhaps she knew he didn't, but was willing to overlook that because of the huge bank balance, and was okay with being a glorified nanny to her husband's children. In addition to that, she was angry at her own parents for wanting her by their side after they had been in a really bad accident, because that was somehow taking away from her time with her new family, which comprised a husband who probably didn't even love her much and 2 kids who were not related to her at all and were doing just as fine with their nanny as they were with her. If the word ungrateful ever had a face, it would be Allison's. I'm no fan of my parents myself, but honestly, when she was talking to me about how they were being too needy, I couldn't even believe this was the girl they'd rejected me over and over again for. Then she got to the purpose of her visit and told me she'd be leaving in 2 days. She'd promised Mom and Dad she'd stay for at least a month, but she claimed she was already bored of listening to them talk about the accident and how they'd had the worst experience of their lives for the 10th time and needed to get back home soon. So now she wanted me to reconcile with them and take her place, because she didn't want to feel the guilt of knowing she'd abandoned her parents when they needed her to be there for them. She didn't know they had cut me off yet again because I refused to help them with the bills, probably because they don't talk about me or even think of me, so they didn't bring that up with Allison. She was here because she wanted sympathy from me, because she'd had to deal with our parents and had to abandon her family, and now wanted to use that sympathy for her own gain and make me step into her shoes and become our parents' emotional support because she didn't feel up to the task. It was just classic Allison manipulation, but I knew it all too well and didn't fall for it. I also had no intention of telling her that while she was at my house, which would inevitably lead to a fight. So I told her I'd try, but I know I won't. She left after telling me to keep in touch, but we both know she doesn't mean that. I was actually glad to see her go, because not only was she a terrible and narcissistic person, but she was also really boring to talk to. I could barely get a word in while she droned on about her uninteresting life in California. It basically just revolves around parties, her stepchildren, and her husband. She thinks she's living the life, but I thought it was truly sad, since clearly her husband doesn't love her, and her kids spend half their time with their mom anyway. So of course they're going to grow up to prefer their biological mother over Allison, and probably do so even now from what I heard. But it's okay, because that's the life she chose for herself, and the life I choose for myself is going to be one that is far, far away from my family, because they're truly undeserving of even a quarter of my attention or sympathy. If anything, today taught me that I've been right to distance myself from my parents and my sister because I do not want to be part of these people's lives. They're incredibly selfish and cruel, and I highly doubt they're even capable of thinking of anyone apart from themselves, especially Allison. I'm ashamed that I'm even related to such people, honestly. At least now I've been able to cut ties with all of them for good, and it isn't likely that they'll be able to get in touch with me anytime soon. I blocked Allison as soon as she left, and I've already had my parents and other relatives blocked for a couple of days now. So I think I'm safe from being troubled by my family for at least the near future. I'll pray that they don't get back in touch with me after this either, because I'm way better off without them.